on the call, and we're really looking forward to this conversation with Joanna. This is Tim Risciolti, the CEO of the Professional Development Academy. Again, welcome everyone to the call. We're looking forward to a great conversation. And let me just remind everyone that feel free to use the chat box to raise questions or provide some comments. That chat box will be monitored regularly throughout the webinar today. And so if you do have a question for Joanna, whether it be specific to cybersecurity and cyber defense, or if it be specific to leadership and being a leader in a massive global organization, feel free to use that chat box to raise your question and to engage with us. Again, that will be monitored regularly throughout this session. And let me, at this time, introduce our executive for this Executive Insights on Leadership. We are joined, and thankfully so, by Joanna Berkey. As you can see, Joanna is the Global Head of Cyber Defense at Siemens. And to provide a little bit more specifics regarding Joanna, in her role as Global Head of Cyber Defense, she's responsible for, as you can imagine, all things cybersecurity related, preparing and preventing and defending and recovering in the ill event of a cyber attack. She's responsible for all of the defense across the infrastructure of Siemens, as well as all of its products and solutions and services. And I'll provide a quick fun fact regarding products that Joanna may not even know about, but just in a minute I'll provide that fun fact. You can see here on her bio that she does work across the globe. She is currently in Texas, but I know that she travels quite a bit around the globe on behalf of Siemens and on behalf of defending not only Siemens but our overarching economy, global economy, and the roles that she plays. You can also see that her background from an education perspective is in computer science and engineering from the University of Texas at Austin. She also focuses significantly on cybersecurity, throughout her entire career. And I'm sure we'll learn more about that career, the journey of that career, as she gets into her presentation. And so I'm going to hand it over to Joanna. And as I do, Joanna, the fun fact that you may or may not know. So you know that we're calling in and hosting this from Portland, Oregon. And Portland, Oregon, like so many cities, has light rail trains as part of the mass transit system of our great city here in Portland. And the mass transit train, the light rail trains that we have, are actually produced by Siemens. And so, thank you for the great products that you create, and thank you for the great services that you create. I know that not only are you in the train business, but importantly for a lot of our benefit, you're also significantly in the medical device business and healthcare business, and we're grateful for quite a number of Siemens products that you all create, and we're certainly grateful for the role that you play, Joanna, in making sure that not only is Siemens safe and secure from a cybersecurity perspective, but as you go about that work, I know that you work throughout the ecosystem and across the entire economy of the work in which Siemens participates, and therefore helps to create our communities and the people in it safe as well. So thank you for the incredibly important role that you play, the expertise that you bring, and the insights that you bring us today as part of this webinar series. Joanna, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Tim, Alicia, and the entire team out there, Craig, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity. And that's a fabulous introduction. I wish I could record that and use it anytime I get introduced anywhere. Because, Tim, you really touched on one of the biggest motivators on why I'm at Siemens and why I continue to be motivated to work in cybersecurity, and it is because of that impact. Even though, even in the years before I joined Siemens, when I was at Hewlett-Packard, the two companies worked together on a lot of initiatives, and I always thought I would really jump at the opportunity to work at Siemens if it became available, because the scope of what the company did was so broad, and that was incredibly motivating to me, even if I'm not writing code myself that goes on a train, to even have a little part in that being available and reliable and safe is just really incredibly motivating. And on the days that are a little harder, that's certainly one of the things that keeps me going. So great intro. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for this opportunity. I've been looking forward to it. I definitely would love for this to be a conversation. I'm not a slide person. You can ask anybody I work with. I'm really not into them. I'm a big whiteboard person. So if we were in person, you'd see me scribbling on a whiteboard the whole time we talk. So in lieu of that, I would love for this to be a conversation. Please, put your hands up, shout, interrupt, anything at all. Because I think one of the fundamental tenets of working in this dynamic world we have and in this dynamic topic of cybersecurity is the collaboration and the reliance we have on each other. And everybody's got something to bring to the table. Everyone has something to contribute. We really can't do it on our own. It's such a complex topic and it's such a complex world out there that we really can't stand on our own. So I'm happy for this to be a conversation. As I was thinking about what might be interesting and relevant to seed that conversation with today, I kept thinking about the leadership journey being such a spectrum. And instead of a one way, you go through 20 stages through your whole career from the beginning to the end, the way I've really seen my own journey go, and I think it's representative for a lot of people, is you kind of go through phases they're really iterations, micro iterations, if you will, where you start to notice wait, I've been in this phase before. Wait, hang on, I've seen this before. And there's certain themes and certain concepts that for me have really held true during all of those phases and during that entire spectrum. And that's kind of how I'd like to structure what we're going to talk about today. But I'm happy for any topics, questions, diversions, anything at all that would be interesting or relevant to you all. And when I think about that journey and those themes, for me, I really find that I feel like I'm always in one of three phases. And sometimes in two at a time, hopefully not three at a time. That's when things get really crazy. But, you constantly find yourself either in a transition. You're in a from here to there, whether it's I want, there is where I'm going, or wait, I'm on my way, I'm almost there, or wait, here, okay, here I am, I got there. There's this idea of getting somewhere, and it's not a magical one and done thing. I think it happens all the time. Then, that happens and you find yourself somewhere. Like, oh, I'm here. Either it's where I'm meant to be or it's kind of unintentional, but here I am. And what do I do with that now that I'm here? And then the third phase that I occasionally find myself in, and this one always kind of seems to be a little bit of a surprise when it happens, is, okay, I'm here, I've been here, but here is different. Here is changing. Here isn't what it was a year ago when I got here. What do I do with that? How do I prepare for that? And then usually that'll kind of move into another, oh, I'm on my way again. I'm going from here to there again. And the phases rinse and repeat a little bit, if you will. But regardless of where you are in your career or your experience level or what you're doing at the time, I do find certain themes and concepts for me personally that hold true. And I'd like to bring up a few of those today. Ideally, maybe they resonate with you a little bit, or maybe they give you something to think about, and maybe something you want to talk about while we're here. And the way I've structured this a little bit is around those three phases. And what do I think about when I'm personally in one of those? So that's kind of a general framework for today. And of course, the logical place to start is the getting from here to there piece. We think about that piece a lot, especially the first parts of our careers. We're really thinking a lot about that journey and what is there to us? Where are we wanting to go? How are we going to get there? And what I've noticed is, I used to think it was this one magical leap. I'm doing this set of things, and then one day I'm going to do the right thing, and it's all going to come together, and I'm going to be there. And instead, what I find is that it's full of leaps. It's constantly leaping. And it's very seldom a one-time move. We're usually either consciously or unconsciously, but we're on our way to something, whether it's by our own intent or because the world around us is changing, but we're usually on the move. And I think it's important to recognize that and accept it, and to think about that move is probably not linear. I really like to talk about and ask people to think about nonlinear paths and nonlinear operations in a job, because the common way to think, at least the way I thought when I got started, was that I was going to have a very linear career. I'm majoring in engineering. I'm going to work as an engineer for a while, and then maybe I move into first line management, and then maybe I manage an entire R&D department, and well, then who knows? But it's going to be cool and awesome, and it's all going to make a lot of sense at the end of the day. And instead, where I found myself was, very unintentionally feeling like I was kind of skipping around a little bit. And for me personally, what happened was I was going through that path the way I thought it was all going to go, and everything was proceeding apace. And I started to get pulled into more customer engagements and customer meetings, which as an engineer doesn't always happen very early in your career. And I realized, wow, there's this whole area of the business I really don't know anything about. I didn't go for my MBA in school. I didn't particularly get turned on by economic topics. I was way more turned on by writing IBM 360, 370 assembly language. And I found myself kind of dipping a toe into these real business aspects of the job and realizing this is actually pretty interesting. And I don't know very much about it. Maybe I should learn more. So I started talking to a few people at work about maybe working in a totally different area, and found myself all of a sudden one day not doing any engineering at all, having given up all my direct reports, and instead I was working in program management and running a technical documentation group. Neither topic did I have experience in, but it seemed like a really interesting thing at the time, and I'm very thankful I had the opportunity for it because it started to get me knowledge and exposure that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And then at that time, I made another kind of jump a year later. You could probably look at my CV and think I had ADD at this point. Fortunately, I was at a company that gave us a lot of opportunity to move around, and I worked in program management product management and product strategy for a while. That really led me back into engineering, but this time running an R&D department in cybersecurity and working as a security evangelist. And when I look back at that, I can either, I have the choice to go, wow, that was really scattered and it didn't really all fit together, but, hey, whatever. Or you can really look at it and say, I'm going to intentionally take what I've learned from these things, and I'm going to develop my own personal framework, my own personal methodology, and I'm going to make it cohesive. Because all of those things I did, all those positions I was in, they may not logically form a progression, but if I can really acknowledge what I learned in each one, how I'm going to use it, how it feeds into how I work today, then it's cohesive. And I really think, I do believe careers and business go in a little bit more nonlinear way than they did a few decades ago. There's a lot more opportunity to move around if you wish to do it, particularly for those of you that are focusing on cybersecurity as a subject matter. Our topic is an excellent one to be nonlinear in because it is so diverse. And I really see now, leading a security organization, there are needs all over the map. We need people that know cybersecurity, but that can do internal marketing. We need people that can do internal stakeholder management and escalation and account management on cybersecurity topics. We don't only need and look for the people who grew up reversing malware and could do it in their sleep. This topic is still so diverse that it's very rewarding to people who want to exploit nonlinear paths. So I like to bring this up because it may be something you choose to do. It may be something that just kind of happens to you in a way, but I think it's important to look at it as a gift and an opportunity and not as a distractor or a derailer. I remember a few times where an opportunity would come up to me and I would think, wow, okay, I could do that. It's really not what I planned, and it's really going to derail what I thought I was going to do. And I think the key there is they're generally not derailers, but oftentimes in what I've seen and in my own experiences, they are gifts. And my move from Hewlett-Packard to Siemens, when it ultimately ended up happening, as I mentioned earlier, I was kind of part of me thinking, wow, I would really like to be there one day. When the opportunity came up, I had the chance to go work in an individual contributor role on cybersecurity business development, not managing an organization, not managing any resources, but reporting directly to the CEO of the Siemens business unit. And that kind of, in a way, seemed like maybe I was taking a step back. And I remember thinking about it, thinking, wow, I've got this career at HP, I've got this organization. Is this really the smartest thing for me to go do? But it was a chance to be at an interesting company, to work directly from a CEO that I really respected and I knew I could learn from. And I thought, yeah, why not? Why not, right? It'll be a great learning experience. It gets me in at a company that I think is a great opportunity. And it was definitely one of the best things I ever did. So I think those nonlinear things can be really valuable when they come up, and that it maybe if you're looking for them, it puts you in a little step ahead, probably, of some of the people around you. I think nonlinearity is also important, not just when you're changing jobs, but when you're in a role as well. And there was a book, I don't know how many of you have seen it. The title is almost too catchy to be real. Like, yeah, you just came up with that title because it sounds great. It's called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And the interesting thing about it, I think, is that concept is so real. And I was very lucky. I got some really good advice early on. In fact, way before that book even came out. My very first promotion into management, I got some great advice from my manager at the time that said, okay, Joanna, you did some great work to get here. You're very competent in these certain areas. You did really good here, here, and there. And what I want to tell you is that's not what's going to get you to the next thing. It got you here. It's not going to get you to the next thing. And at first I wasn't really sure what he was talking about. I thought, well, yeah, I have a different job. Okay, end of story. But it's really, I think, a little bit more profound than that, in that we all learn that when we get stressed and when we're uncomfortable, and particularly when we're something new, we really want to go to our comfort zones. We want to go to those things that have worked for us in the past because, subconsciously you think, well, I did this in the past, it worked for me, I'm going to do it again. It'll probably work again, it worked the first time. And sometimes that's exactly the wrong thing to do because it's not your job anymore. But it's so hard to fight against that tendency to go to the comfort zone, to do what you know you're good at. So, I can't tell you that there's a great recipe for how not to do it, but it kind of feeds into this nonlinearity theme where, I did one thing, I did one job, I got my promotion. Well, surely I kind of continue that, right? Well, maybe not. Maybe you don't. And that's why it's so key to be looking around you and seeing, okay, well, now I'm here. Now what's around me? Now what does it need? Which really kind of feeds us into the second phase in this spectrum that sometimes I find myself in, which is the, okay, I'm here. Now what do I do? And, I will stop talking for a minute to take a sip of my tea and open it up to see, does anybody have a point or a thought or anything that you'd like to develop on in some of the things I've brought up so far?
Yeah, thanks, Joanna. There are a couple questions that have come in, and it's a great pausing point here as we think about this moving aspect. The one question that came in, I think, is a great one. You had mentioned the role that you're playing as security evangelist, and the question is, can you help me understand what a security evangelist is and what role did that play within your organization? And, after you address that question, I'll then get into the next question, which is a little bit more focused on that movement from the engineering, quote-unquote, possible linear side of things to the move toward the, more in-depth of the business side around products and services. But Joanna, in the role that you played as evangelist, what did that mean and what did that entail and how did you carry that out?
Mm-hmm. It's a really interesting concept of a role because I think it kind of developed organically in a lot of companies in the last years. And I believe still for a number of years, this concept is going to continue to be valuable and relevant. What security evangelism meant at my point in time, I was at Hewlett-Packard managing a R&D department that focused on cybersecurity product and also research. We had a section that focused on doing our reversing, our forensics. We had a section focused on innovative research. We had a section focused on development, all of it around cybersecurity. And I started getting tapped on the shoulder occasionally by our product management teams, by our sales teams to say, I need somebody to come talk to my customer. I need somebody to come talk to a conference. I need somebody to come speak here. Because what we really noticed was there needs to be these bridges between, because cybersecurity, unless you've been in it, you've worked in it, you've learned it, it can really still be a black box to a lot of people. The problem is it's so relevant to everybody in the world to some degree, but very few people know very much about it. There somehow needs to be this bridge of how do we inform the world of what they need to know, either so they act safe online, or so they make the right buying decisions for their company, or so they make the right technology architecture and framework decisions for their R&D organization. All kinds of different audiences have different needs, but they need to know more about cybersecurity. And a lot of product managers, a lot of salespeople were running up against their limits on what they could talk about. And so this kind of just developed within Hewlett-Packard that a few of us who knew more about it technically and kind of had a deeper experience on the topic, but that were also able to communicate publicly, we found this real need to be out there talking. And whether it was 2 customers on the other side of the table or if it was a conference of 500 people, the idea was the same, which was make cybersecurity concepts understandable to the common man. And I think if you define what is a security evangelist, it is exactly that. Taking complex cybersecurity ideas and distilling them down into something an audience can understand for their needs. And, I think it takes a really big company to have that as a dedicated role. I'm not even sure I would have wanted to do it totally as a dedicated role, because wearing that hat, in addition to managing this organization, the managing of the organization kept my knowledge fresh and, kept me up to date on topics. And then the evangelism hat gave me a place to go use that for the benefit of the company and the benefit of the customers. So if I were back in those same shoes again, I would absolutely urge you guys to whom this sounds interesting, go make that niche, because you can absolutely make that niche. Make yourself helpful to salespeople, make yourself helpful to account managers, and companies begin to see the value of having this sort of thing to promote their products, their agenda, whatever.
Yeah, I can certainly understand how that would be valuable for those product folks, bringing you into customers and having you explain that. And the evangelist role now makes extreme sense. And one of the follow-up questions that I'll introduce it now, but I think you're going to get to it, Joanna, and it might be more pertinent once we get to the third phase that you're talking about, where once you're here is now changing and here is now different. The question is, and again, we don't need to address this one right now because there is a follow-up question from Mary that I want to get to, but I'll raise it as a prelude because I think it'll come into your talking points. The question was pertaining to the business. You had mentioned that you shifted from that engineering track, if you will. You didn't use the word track, but those kind of on a career track know that terminology, obviously. And you went from the engineering side to the product side, to the solution side, which really no doubt required you to have a much broader breadth of business savvy, business knowledge, market knowledge regarding some of where the markets are going, how your products address the market. And I'd like to, once we get into that third phase, have a conversation about how you went about knowing the business. Because certainly you have to have technical savvy to be expert in engineering and in cybersecurity. But as you start to move beyond that, move up in the organization as a security officer or a director or into the business further around products and solutions that are being provided, you certainly need to cast a much wider net around understanding the business that you're in and the markets that you're in, which is much broader. And so I'd love to have you talk about that once, probably when you get into that third phase, when here is now changing, how do we know what to do next and how do we know where to move the business? But before we get to that, Mary raised a question, and her question is, when you made the shift to focusing on things or skills that will get you, quote unquote, there, what are some examples? What did you focus on? What was focused on changing, and how did you identify those things that needed to help get you there? Were there people around, or how did you identify those things that needed to change to get you from here to there? And thanks, Mary, for the question.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. It's a really good one. And I think for everybody, when you look back on your career, your answer is going to be a little different. And I'm happy to share what it looked like for me. Because I think, and I would urge you to ask this question and have this conversation with a lot of different people to hear their answers. Because the way it worked for me might be different from someone else. But it also ties a little bit into the whole kind of changing tracks area. And how do you decide, is that right for me? How would I do it? Sounds great, but what does it mean? And it ties really nicely into this second phase, which is kind of the, okay, I'm here now, what? I cannot overemphasize the importance of people and relationships at work to simply learn what's going on in other areas. Some working environments, it's easy. Some of them, you have to work a little bit more toward it. But I began kind of almost inadvertently to get exposure to colleagues in other departments. And just by having lunches with them and talking to them and hearing what they were doing, I started to see this whole world out there that I didn't know about. And I think it's so easy to get into that trap of thinking, well, I wasn't trained to do this, so I don't know, I don't have the knowledge. The reality is, all training really does us is teaches us how to learn. It may give us some specialized knowledge. I mean, I happened to graduate college and know how to write computer code. Okay, other people graduate and they know how to deal with accounting systems. But as long as you know how to learn, knowledge is out there forever. And in my experience, so many of these things that seemed like black boxes were very logical once you learned about them. And when you hear somebody, particularly someone who enjoys what they do and is passionate about it, when you hear them talk about what they do, I find that it often just makes sense. And as I began to find myself talking to customers more, that was really kind of the what got me into it a little bit at first. One of the groups I was managing in R&D was a customer support group that did third level support, mostly programming, but in response to issues at customer sites, et cetera, et cetera. That got me in front of customers more for the first time in my career. And so I started working around people that did this for a living. They did customer interaction for a living. And learning from them and talking to them and just informally was a huge first step in that whole starting to give me a few more tools in my toolbox. So Mary, I would say absolutely one of the biggest, most accessible and affordable resources around you is people. And it's intimidating sometimes depending on the person, but I really believe people love to talk about what they do. And in reality, people love to talk about themselves. They do. They love it. And you get somebody talking about what they do, they're probably also going to enjoy it. And everybody likes to share expertise and things that they think they've done well. And that's, you don't really have to pay for it. Maybe you buy somebody lunch, but it's an amazing tool around you everywhere you go. And that's kind of that's definitely the first thing that comes to my mind to start to get knowledge and exposure. And, I still look at my own skill set, and there's areas where I still feel like I don't know as much as I would like. And every time I run into that, I go and I find somebody who does know that area, and I just ask them to talk to me about it. And I honestly can tell y'all, I've not once had somebody turn me down to that offer. I would highly recommend it. And that kind of, it feeds into this, okay, now I'm here, what do I do? I already talked a little bit about thinking about where you are slightly differently. Acknowledge that it's probably different from where you were. And the interesting thing about this phase is there is so much advice out there. I mean, books and books and books about the first 90 days and the 555, and it's really overwhelming, honestly. And I think what that tells you is there isn't a magic bullet, there isn't a magic recipe. And that's good news for us, really, in a way, because it means every situation is a little bit different, and you have just as much chance to be successful in a new situation as anyone else, because it's going to be a little different. I have found two things that I really do keep top of mind, especially when I'm in something new, that have served me really well. And one of them is to consciously maintain an operational and a strategic balance. Personally, I find this very, very difficult. A lot of roles will push us to be more operational. A lot of roles push us to be more strategic just by their very nature. But acknowledge that any role anywhere is going to have a mix of those two needs, and they're quite different. You know, sitting down and doing your email and meetings for 4 hours is very operational. To carve yourself away from that and to sit and to think and to plan and to get in a different mindset and to be strategic, that's a totally different way of thinking and working. So it's so easy to sit down at your desk in the morning and start being operational and just be operational all day long, because who doesn't have a huge backlog of email that needs to be attended to? But I think it's really important. Acknowledge that both need to be done and find the right framework for you on how to tend to both. Personally, I like to remind myself of a phrase I heard one time that I really liked, and it was zoom out, then back in. And what that means to me personally is periodically, and I do it at least once a week. I wrote it on my whiteboard in my home office, and I keep it on a little sticky note in one of my journals when I'm on the road. It means sit down, think farther out ahead. What am I looking at in 3 years? Is my 3-year plan still valid? Do the concepts still resonate with me? If so, zoom back and say, okay, what am I doing right now that still feeds into that plan? Maybe I'm still doing all the things I need to do. Maybe I need to make a little change. But that periodic zooming out, think big, and then back it up and think, okay, how does it need to affect my tomorrow? That personally works for me. So I mentioned there's 2 things I keep in mind on this topic. The second one is find that guiding practice and framework that works for you and do it. Whether you like the idea of the 5-5-5, where, have a 5-day plan, have a 5-week plan, have a 5-month plan, 5-year plan, or you like to think about, okay, the next 30 days, okay, the next 90 days. However you like to think about it. And one of the most unique pieces of advice I ever heard was from a product strategist, and he said, everywhere I am, I always think about what I want my press release in 1 year to say. In 1 year, we're going to have a product press release, and what do I want that to say? He said, that's my guiding North Star. So find that framework that works for you, and then whatever tools you need, visual tools, audio tools, whatever kind of reminds you to use that as a touchstone, just use that. And it really will, I believe, help you balance those competing forces of strategy and operations, both of which are really important.
Yeah, Joanna, a quick question that just came in regarding that. And the question starts with a statement. A lot of what you're talking about is for us individually, which is great. Do you use these same practices for the teams that you manage? So is there a zoom out, zoom in exercise that you do with the team, or are these just for yourself?
Someone read my notes and read my next segue, because that is the perfect transition into kind of how I think of the third phase. And the third phase is I was here and everything was working great, and all of a sudden now it's different. And in my notes, I had written a note to myself that said, up until now, surprisingly, everything we've talked about is self-management. And that's kind of surprising for a leadership talk. You expect a leadership talk to be about people, right? And I kind of did that on purpose because there's, I believe, 3 really strong legs to that leadership tripod. And it is managing your business, it's managing your organization, and it's managing yourself. And by self-management, I don't mean self-help, I don't mean self-care. Those are important things. I really mean the disciplined management of yourself, just like you manage an organization and just like you manage a business. So I'm going to elaborate a little bit on kind of some of my thoughts around there, but I liked your question, which was what we've talked about so far is relevant to people management as well. The operational and strategic balance and the zooming out and zooming back in, I use all the time with my team, because I know I'm not the only one out there who needs to be both operational and strategic in my job. I expect my leadership team that reports to me to also be the same. So we talk about it a lot, and I guide them a little bit and ask them, okay, what are you doing in these areas? What are you doing in these areas? How are you balancing the two? What's your 3-year plan? Okay, here's mine. How are we now going to develop your pillar to feed into this overall strategy? So we really speak a lot about these concepts. I would say, I do a once weekly staff meeting with my global leadership team. I will tell you, it is damn hard to find a time of day where you can do that. And I would say at least every other staff meeting, we're discussing this. What are we doing in both areas? So we make sure they're both getting attention. And for a lot of people, especially if you're managing people that come from technical backgrounds, this is really good for them to get exposure to because it's not something you really get a lot of early in your career. You don't have a lot of technical managers sit down with you and go, okay, what's your 3-year plan for your code? So these are very key concepts, I believe, for the people around you as well as yourself. Now, I really emphasized these topics kind of around self-management at first because I do think it's very easy to ignore them. And it's also important to acknowledge, because if you don't manage yourself well, all of these other things are going to suffer. And, again, I'm not really talking self-care. It's literally how you manage your calendar, how you prioritize, how you manage your time. Look at yourself and your hours as just as important a topic as, say, a business goal that you have. And it's important, too, to acknowledge different people are really different in this area. Your colleague may have an easy time with time management. Simple as pie. They have no trouble prioritizing early in the day, getting the important things done, but maybe that's really hard for you. Maybe calendar management is really hard for you. Find the things you need to pay attention to and then do it, just like you would focus on any other area. And I'm kind of torn. I can go 2 directions right now. I want to talk about this changing tracks thing. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about the people management because then I think these kind of segue together. There's 2 things I'd really like to bring up around people and team management, and it's really around the, 3rd phase of, here is now changing. You can find different schools of thought on, is the world really VUCA out there? Volatile, uncertain, chaotic, ambiguous? Or is it just the same old chaos we've always had in business? The reality is I don't really know that it matters what you believe there as long as you acknowledge that the pace of change in business is increasing. Digitalization and technology have really enabled a very, very strong acceleration in the pace of change. I believe myself, a couple of decades ago, you would look more at like 10-year, maybe even 15-year cycles of business in some areas, particularly manufacturing, industrial. We had very long business cycles. Then, as technology became more prevalent, you moved more into 3 to 5 year business cycles. Now, personally, I feel like we're looking at like 12 to 18-month business cycles in my own world. So acknowledging this, it's really important that you work with and equip your teams and your people to deal with this world as well as yourself. I think as a leader, it's really imperative that we're doing all we can to equip people to be their best, no matter where they are. They may stick with you and work with you through thick and thin in different roles for 10 years. They may be only be at your company for 6 months. But I really believe it's important for us to be equipping people with tools to work in this VUCA world and to have a strong foundation between yourself and your teams in this area. I cannot stress enough, and I know I'm going to say this and y'all are going to go, yeah, that's so basic, but it's so true. It's being there and it's listening. And these are so hard to do when you're stressed, when you're flying apart at the seams, when you feel like there's just not enough seconds in the minute. Being there and listening are hard because they take focus, they take time, and they take commitment. But without those, you truly never get to the respected, trusted leadership place where you then are a rock to help guide your team through these changing times. And a little bit of a pivot right now, I would like to touch on the changing tracks question, because oftentimes it's in the wait, here is changing times that we have the chance and the opportunities to change tracks. I have found myself that, again, one of the best tools for this is the people around you. because oftentimes just by talking to them, you get exposed to different domains, ideas, concepts that you might not have thought of on your own. And it is amazing to me now how much training and knowledge is available to us all around us on the internet, on opportunities like this leadership school that you all are doing, again, with the people around us. It takes time and it takes a little commitment, and it also takes initiative. Something I often remind people in my organization about, because sometimes I have people come to me and go, I want to change. I really believe I can contribute a lot more to the company if I work in this different area. And my answer to them is always, okay, great. How are you going to take the first steps to do that? And sometimes they kind of look at me like, well, you're supposed to do it for me. We know that the company, there's not going to do that. You own the doing of that. And to look around you and acknowledge those resources, again, I'm a bit of a broken record, but it's people. But then it's the huge amount of knowledge available out there on the internet, the knowledge available in cohorts and schools and training opportunities. In my experience, these can give you the little seeds to show you what's available, how you might want to pivot in your own track. And I'd say, listen to your gut. Trust your gut a little bit on, maybe you go on a business trip with a product strategist and you're talking to them and you kind of realize, hey, what they do is kind of neat. I kind of want to hear more about that. Trust that gut feeling. Dive into it a little bit. You don't have to change your career tomorrow, but dive into it a little bit. And if it stays interesting to you, that might be the signal to you that that's a good pivot in your own career. And my kind of last word on that, because I've been talking a little bit for a while now, is I would imagine that many or all of you are in environments that will be very accommodating and very flexible to what you want to do, maybe more than you think. I remember thinking myself that very first time I moved out of engineering into program management, I thought, well, here's how I'm going to pitch it. Here's my business case. I'm going to say, look, I'll do this and I'll learn it for 6 months and And when I went to the colleague who would be hiring me, and I kind of pitched him my little plan, he looked at me, he goes, I'll take you next week and you can start doing it. We don't need some 6-month learning period. I've worked with you. I believe you're competent. Come on over and we'll do it. And I bet a lot of you are in environments where you would have these opportunities when you decide you want to investigate them and invest in them. The one thing here I didn't get to, and maybe y'all want to hear about it in the Q&A period, is a little bit of how do you manage a cybersecurity organization in this VUCA world and in this time of change. I'm happy to talk about it or not. We can kind of let the questions guide us right now if you guys wish.
Yeah, thanks, Joanna. I do think that there's a good segue here, because one of the questions that we have is, as someone that is in the business of cybersecurity, the question is, what keeps you up at night? Clearly, this question, I think is certainly a real question, but probably, a bit tongue-in-cheek. There's a lot of difficulty and challenge that you face specifically in your role. We see it on the news and in any of the online papers or articles that we read on a regular basis. We see the amount of hacks that are happening, attacks on major organizations, whether it be banks or credit rating systems. The Equifaxes of the world are famous for this, or infamous, I should say. Major retailers like Target, and the role that you play relative to focusing on, autonomous and digitalization of work that you do specifically within your organization, and just then in general across the discipline that you focus on. There is a lot to, quote-unquote, be worried about. And the question is, what keeps you up at night? And I think an accompanying question to this is a good one, and it is, how do you stay optimistic? Because as a leader, no doubt you have to remain optimistic about what is going on and how you go about your work. So what does keep you up at night, and how do you stay optimistic and hopeful in the work that you're doing every day?
Excellent questions and points. I periodically think about what's keeping me awake, usually when it's 3 a.m. and I am awake. And it's interesting how often that changes. And I will tell you lately, what it has been is this fear and this knowledge that there's certain things we know we need to do, and we know how to do them, but the getting them done is proving so difficult. And I'll give an example of what I'm talking about is we are using an advanced EDR solution at Siemens on endpoints, on servers, on various assets. And, that's something in the realm of the CrowdStrike, the Windows Defender, the, NNN. The operational difficulty of getting that software on each asset on a sustainable and consistent basis has been a headache. The hardest part wasn't buying it. The hardest part wasn't deciding which solution to go with. It's now, how do you have an IT process that makes sure it's on every rebuilt client? When maybe we have to wipe a client because it had malware, how do we make sure it's on there? How do we make sure it gets re-enabled if a user disables it? It's these operational difficulties that make doing what we need to do difficult that really keeps me up, because imagine the world where there's a significant breach because a certain asset wasn't covered by this solution, and the managing board looks at me and says, okay, why wasn't it on there? And my answer of, well, we couldn't get the IT service provider and IT to talk to each other to do it. That's not a good answer, especially not to the managing board. So where I spend a lot of my time, and I believe every security leader, no matter where they are, is going to be spending more and more time going forward, is how we implement this practice of cybersecurity in our companies. It's not enough to just buy the technology. It's not enough to just deploy the technology and think that it's deployed everywhere. It's the actual practice of, is what we're deploying sustainable? Is it working? Are we paying attention to what's happening? And that's the non-sexy part, but the really critical part, because if those processes don't work, then what was the point? Why did you buy all that fancy software? That's one of the biggest things keeping me awake. Now, to stay optimistic, I do my best to, judge how much of the pessimism and the topics I bring up to my team. I don't tell them every time I'm really, really discouraged. I don't tell them every time I think, oh, we're fighting a losing battle. What I really do make a point to do, though, is to always be honest and always be transparent. I don't need to act like every day is sunny, because we know it's not. And having that honesty, I think, is a very critical foundation. But then on top of that honesty, you always need to celebrate the successes. And there are successes every day in cybersecurity. I think we can even maybe more easily find successes than some other topic areas. Recently, we had a situation where a operational process problem at Siemens led to a cybersecurity issue at a customer side, which is very hard to call that a success right out of the gate. But as a result of that problem, we were able to get through and turn on and utilize some additional features that we had not successfully been able to get through and done and turned on yet. So even just taking a bad occurrence and getting a good result out of it, that can oftentimes be a success to seize on in cybersecurity. And I think it's really important to find those, to mention them, to recognize the analysts and the people working on them, because they have enough every day that's going to discourage them. In celebrating these successes helps just a little bit in showing that, it's not all doom and gloom, even though really at 3 a.m. sometimes it feels like it.
Yeah, great point. And, it goes back to your earlier point, too, that it is all about the people. When you are trying to being there all the time and listening to recognize them, and then also recognizing their successes in the good fights that they're fighting every day, because there are significant wins every day, especially on the cyber front, and those often go unnoticed because there isn't an attack, there isn't a front page news story that's created, but it has been prevented, and so celebrating those wins is a great reminder. There's a question that came in from Glenn as well here, Joanna, and it goes back to the zooming in and out comment you made earlier. And the question is one of the way in which you accommodate that, whether it is kind of a reflective aspect or if it's more intentional. And what Glenn notes here is, in regard to zooming in and out, the focus on strategic and operational, How do you structure your calendar in order to accommodate for that work?
Excellent question, Glenn. I've experimented with a lot of different things. And I will tell you currently, my MO is that every other Friday, I will block on my calendar. And that is the day that I make sure, and reality always hits. Sometimes there's a few high priority things that must get done. I usually do spend an hour on email, my admin helps me with this. She's a huge part of this. She understands my commitment to this idea, and she does her best to keep it clear as well. I simply leave that as clear as possible to force myself into looking at that balance and being, it sounds funny, but being operational about how I'm going to be strategic. And I don't know how you guys feel. I have, at many, many points in my career, felt really bad to say no to people on time because I'm sitting here saying, be there, listen, always be available. And then to say no to somebody, no, you can't have that time on a Friday, feels like you're being disrespectful to them. But I've learned, and I really, and this has proven true so many times for me, if I am distracted, if I'm really wishing I was elsewhere, if I'm really not in the right mindset that day, spending that time with that person isn't going to be good for them anyway, and it's not going to be good for me. So I've given myself permission to not feel bad about taking that time, because at the end of the day, if I don't take that time, the company suffers, the team suffers, and maybe my guys suffer a lot more at the end of the day. I would encourage you, Glenn, ask other people that question, because my answer may not work for you personally, but for me, finally giving myself permission to do it was the key part. And now I do it, and so far the world hasn't stopped spinning.
Great point. One other question that came in, and we've got about 8 minutes left, and so I'll raise this question. It might be the last one, but if there are other questions, feel free to use the chat box, and I will continue to pick those up. But this question is one of a global scale, Joanna, and it is relative to the role you play. And you did mention being there and listening. Do you? The comment states here that I am recently been promoted to a role that I now have a distributed team that I'm responsible for. Are there any tips and tricks that you can share regarding how best to balance a distributed team?
Mm-hmm. This is a great topic, and I know a few minutes isn't enough to give it service, but I'll tell you what I'm thinking on this lately. I have found it really critical in the early days to get a basis, a foundation for working with people. If it is possible for you, and congratulations on your promotion, if it is possible for you to sometime in your first 3 months get FaceTime with your team, you will set a very much, I think, more solid working foundation for doing more virtually going forward. That may not be possible. If it's not, that's fine. I think as much contact as you can establish in the early days will pay off down the road. And in fact, this morning, I just had this conversation with one of my leadership team members. He's based in Germany. And I have actually, in the last year, I've been living in Germany more than I've been living in Texas. That was a difficult and large commitment on my part, but I had my family support to do it. I had the company support to do it. So I invested that time. And he told me this morning, wow, it's so much easier to have a video call with you because you and I now have such a foundation for working together. So it may not be realistic for all of you for FaceTime to be that foundation. But find the way that your new team or your new colleagues, find the way that they like to work and try to accommodate that early on if you can, because it will help give them a comfort level. And if they are more comfortable, then you will have a much easier time as a global leader. But I know you hear this, and I'm going to say it as well. Recognizing your own boundaries is critical. Being on the road too much can lead to getting sick. It can lead to issues at home. It can lead to, not doing your job as well. Be very aware of those things and keep in mind that it is a long game. It's not a short game. And whatever you need to do to take care of yourself for the long game, it is absolutely the right thing to do.
Yeah, extremely wise advice, and so appreciative of your insights this morning, Joanna, or in the afternoon, depending on where everyone is dialing in from. You know, it is a long game, and, you know, we do recognize and thank you for the reminder and the insights on what got you here won't get you there. And at the end of the day, it is all about people, how we build strong relationships with people, how we help be in service to people, and how we use individuals in a good way to learn more about ourselves and to see opportunities that maybe we otherwise didn't see or wouldn't see if we weren't intentional about, you know, being open to move beyond just our linear path that we had otherwise set out for ourselves. And such an amount of great takeaways and key thoughts and insights here today. And Joanna, thank you so much for spending your time and sharing your experiences with us as we continue to work to get better and better and better as leaders and with our own leadership. And so thank you everyone for dialing in and joining us today for this continued webinar series. It was great to have Joanna work with us today. Our next executive that's going to be providing insights on her leadership is Kate Byrne, the president of Intentional Media. Kate was the former president of Watermark out of California, and we're looking forward to that next month. And we hope that you'll join us next month as well. It'll be at the same time. It'll be on September 17th. We'll get information out to everyone. So for all of those participants in the Professional Development Academy, thank you for your participation. Thank you for your focus on your leadership and in the leadership that you provide to those that you serve every day within your organizations. And thank you for all the supervising managers that are dialing in today as well, sponsoring your individuals going through our academy. It's our pleasure to provide this Executive Insight on Leadership webinar series to you this year. And again, Joanna, thank you so much for your time. We wish Joanna a great day. We wish all of you a great day. Have a wonderful week. And if you ever need anything, feel free to reach out to us here at the Academy. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day. Bye now.
Thank you.